To my parents, my bar card was nothing more than a receipt for a bad investment, while my siblings boasted about six-figure bonuses and corporate retreats. I was the cautionary tale, the daughter who wasted her potential fighting for clients who could not pay. They spent 33 years convinced I had failed at the only game that mattered, never suspecting that the very judge they feared would one day ask me to take the bench herself. The fluorescent lights of the Halcyon Springs Legal Aid office always seemed to hum with a specific, headache-inducing frequency around 7 in the evening. It was the sound of underfunding, of deferred maintenance, and of sheer exhaustion. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, staring at the file open on my desk. The edges of the manila folder were soft and frayed, much like my patience. 33 years old. That was the number that kept circling my mind, pressing against my temples. By 33, my law school classmates who had gone the corporate route were making partner, or at least senior associate. They were buying vacation homes in the mountains and driving cars that smelled like imported leather. I, on the other hand, was driving a 10-year-old sedan with a sticky transmission and eating a lukewarm sandwich from the vending machine while trying to keep Mrs. Higgins from getting evicted over a $60 dispute with her landlord. I closed the file, the heavy thud echoing in the empty bullpen. My colleague, Diego, had left an hour ago to pick up his kids. The cleaning crew would not come for another 2 hours. It was just me and the phantom weight of my student loans, which sat on my shoulders like a wet wool coat that I could never quite take off. My phone buzzed against the laminate desktop, vibrating with a ferocity that made me jump. I looked down. It was the family group chat. Dinner at 7:30. Mom made roast. It was a command, not a question. A second message popped up immediately after. Don't be late. Maddie, Nathan is flying out tomorrow. I sighed, the sound loud in the quiet room. I considered claiming work. I considered saying I had a court appearance early in the morning, which was true, but I knew the cost of absence. If I did not show up, I became the topic of conversation rather than a participant in it. It was better to be there to defend myself, even if my defense rarely held up in the court of the Butler family dining room. I packed my bag, shoving the heavy binders of case law next to my worn-out laptop. I turned off the lights, plunging the office into gray shadows, and walked out into the cool evening air of Halcyon Springs. The city was beautiful in a way, nestled in the valley, but the divide was sharp. Down here, near the courthouse and the bus depot, the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks were cracked. Up on the ridge, where my parents lived, the air was clearer. The lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives, and failure was something you whispered about, not something you lived. The drive took 20 minutes. I spent every minute of it steeling myself. I turned up the radio to drown out the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my father, reminding me that I was driving a dented car to a house paid for by success I had not achieved. When I pulled into the driveway, the difference in our lives was parked right there on the asphalt. Nathan's sleek black sports car sat next to Jenna's oversized luxury SUV. My sedan looked like a mistake parked beside them, a clerical error in steel and glass. I walked up the front steps, smoothing the wrinkles in my suit skirt. It was a cheap suit, polyester blend, bought off the rack at a department store sale. Jenna would be wearing silk. I knew it before I even opened the door. The smell of rosemary and garlic hit me first. It was the smell of my childhood, comforting and suffocating all at once. There she is, my father's voice boomed from the living room. Richard Butler did not speak. He broadcast, "The public defender of the downtrodden finally clocks out." I walked in, forcing a smile that felt tight on my face. "Hi, Dad. I'm legal aid, not a public defender. Civil cases, remember?" "Same difference. Madeline, same difference." He waved a hand, holding a tumbler of scotch in the other. He was a big man who took up a lot of space, both physically and emotionally. "You're doing the Lord's work for the Lord's pay, right?" My mother, Elaine, fluttered out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked tired, her smile nervous and flitting about the room like a trapped bird. Oh, leave her alone. Richard, hi, sweetie. You look tired. Are you eating enough? I'm fine. Mom, I said, accepting her peck on the cheek. Just a long week. Come, sit, she urged, ushering us toward the dining room. Everything is ready. The table was set with the good china, the gold-rimmed plates reserved for occasions when Nathan or Jenna were around. I took my usual seat at the side, opposite Jenna. Jenna looked immaculate. Her hair was a glossy sheet of blonde perfection, her skin glowing with the kind of health that costs $300 a month in serums. She smiled at me, a dazzling display of perfect dentistry. Hey, Maddie, she said. Love the blazer? Is that new? No, I said, unfolding my napkin. I have had it for 3 years. Oh, she said, her interest evaporating instantly. Well, it is very practical. Nathan sat at the other end, tapping on his phone until the very last second before Dad carved the roast. He worked in tech, something vague and high-level involving algorithms and supply chains that I never quite understood and was never really explained to me. So, Dad said, dropping a thick slice of meat onto my plate. Nathan was just telling us about his quarterly options. Tell Madeline. Nate, give her something to aim for. Nathan shrugged, a gesture of false modesty that he had perfected. It is nothing huge. The board approved a new vesting schedule. If the stock holds at 150, the payout next month should be around $80,000. Post-tax. $80,000. That was nearly double my annual salary. He made it in a bonus. That is wonderful. Nathan, Mom said, beaming. You have worked so hard. It is a grind, Nathan said, reaching for the potatoes. But the market is hot right now. We are thinking of buying a second place in Tahoe. Get some skiing in next season. And Jenna? Dad pivoted, the spotlight moving down the line. How is the marketing world treating my star girl? Jenna took a sip of wine, savoring the moment. We just closed the account with that new electric vehicle startup. My commission alone covers the down payment on the new condo downtown. Plus, they are flying the whole team to Cabo for a retreat next week. 5 stars, obviously. Atta girl, Dad said, raising his glass. That is what hustle looks like. Real success. Tangible results. Then, the silence fell. The inevitable pause where the spotlight had to swing to me, not to illuminate, but to interrogate. And how is the charity ward? Madeline? Dad asked. He did not look me in the eye. He was focused on cutting his meat. It is not charity, Dad, I said, keeping my voice level. It is legal representation for people who have been systematically disenfranchised. I won a hearing today that kept a single mother and her 3 children from sleeping in their car. But did she pay you? Nathan asked, smirking. That is not how it works, Nate. You know that. I know, he chuckled. I just do not know how you deal with it. All that desperation. And for what? Peanuts? You are a lawyer, Maddie. You passed the bar. Eventually, I froze. The fork halfway to my mouth stopped. It took 2 tries, I said quietly. 9 years ago. I am just saying, Nathan continued, oblivious or cruel. You could be doing real law, corporate litigation, mergers, something where the clients actually shower before they come to your office. Nathan? Mom hissed, but there was no heat in it. She looked at me with apologetic eyes, but she did not tell him to stop. She never did. What? Nathan defended himself. I'm just saying she is selling herself short. She is smart enough, well, smart enough for state school. Anyway. Hey, Dad interrupted, laughing. Do not knock the state school. It was cheap. Saved me a bundle since she did not get the scholarships you two did. I took a drink of water, wishing it was vodka. I am happy with my work, I lied. It matters. Matters, Jenna mused. You know what matters? Security, building a legacy. Remember that time you called Dad crying because you missed that filing deadline? What was it? 5 years ago? My stomach dropped. I knew this was coming. It was their favorite anecdote. "Jenna, please," I said. "No, it is funny," she insisted, turning to Nathan. "She calls the house. Completely hysterical, snot crying. 'Daddy, I missed the deadline. I ruined the case.' She was a grown woman, sobbing like a toddler because she forgot to look at a calendar." "I did not forget," I said, my voice tight. "The electronic filing system crashed. It was a technical error." "But you got reprimanded, right?" Dad chimed in, pointing his knife at me. "I remember that. A mark on your permanent record. We had to talk you off the ledge for 3 hours. I am going to get disbarred. I am going to lose everything." Drama, drama, drama. They all laughed. It was a warm, communal sound, a family sharing a joke. But I was the punchline. I remembered that night differently. I remembered the sheer terror, the crushing weight of responsibility for a client who trusted me, and the realization that a system glitch could destroy a life. I remembered calling home because I needed reassurance, needed someone to tell me that one mistake did not define me. Instead, they had turned my vulnerability into a dinner party story, a way to remind themselves that I was the fragile one, the one who cracked. "I learned from it," I said, staring at my plate. "I have never missed a deadline since." "Well, sure," Dad said, wiping his mouth. "Easy to hit deadlines when the stakes are low, right? It is not like you are handling billion-dollar mergers. If you mess up a welfare case, what is the worst that happens? Someone has to find a new apartment? They become homeless." "Dad," I said, my voice rising slightly. "They lose their children to the state. People die on the streets." Okay, calm down," Dad said, holding up his hands. Always so serious. "You need to loosen up. Maybe if you made some real money, you could afford to relax." I looked at Mom, begging her silently to change the subject. She caught my eye and cleared her throat nervously. "Speaking of money," Mom said, her voice trembling slightly, "I was thinking about your grandmother today. Ruth." The mood in the room shifted instantly. A heavy, awkward silence descended. "What about her?" I asked. Grandma Ruth had been dead for 4 years. She was the only person in this family who had ever looked at me and seen something other than a disappointment. She had been a firecracker of a woman, a community organizer in her youth, a believer in justice. "Just the house," Mom said, "and the will." "Mom, we went over this," Nathan said, his tone bored. "Grandma made bad investments. The nursing home took the rest. There was nothing left." "I know," Mom said quickly. "I know. It is just... She worked so hard. She was reckless with her portfolio," Dad grunted. "I told her 1,000 times to move that money into stable index funds. But no, she had her own ideas, wanted to support ethical companies. Woke nonsense before it had a name. That is why the markets wiped her out." I frowned. "Did they?" Dad looked at me sharply. "Did they what?" "Wipe her out," I said. "Grandma was sharp. She read the Wall Street Journal every morning. I never understood how she could have lost everything so quickly right at the end." "Because you do not understand business, Madeline," Jenna said, swirling her wine. "Markets are volatile. If you are not paying attention, and let's be honest, Grandma was slipping at the end, you get crushed. Gregory Caro explained it all to us. The estate was underwater." "Caro," I muttered. Gregory Caro was the family attorney, a man with a smile like a used car salesman and a suit that cost more than my car. I never liked him. He always looked at me like I was a piece of furniture he wanted to rearrange. "Gregory is a good man," Dad said firmly. "He handled a very messy situation with grace. He saved us from a lot of debt that Ruth tried to leave behind. You should be grateful he did not charge us his full rate." "I just wish she had left something for you, Maddie," Jenna said, her voice dripping with faux pity. "I know you were counting on it, since, you do not really have a retirement plan." "I was not counting on anything," I lied again. I miss her." "We all do," Mom said softly. "Well," Dad clapped his hands together. signaling the end of the emotional portion of the evening. Who wants dessert? Elaine made pie. The dinner dragged on for another hour. I ate the pie, which tasted like ash in my mouth. I listened to Nathan explain the future of cryptocurrency, and Jenna described the thread count of the sheets in her new master bedroom. I nodded at the right times. I smiled when required. I shrank in my chair, making myself smaller and smaller until I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. When the ordeal was finally over, I helped Mom clear the table. I carried a stack of plates into the kitchen, the sounds of Dad and Nathan laughing in the living room fading behind the swinging door. Mom was at the sink, scrubbing a pot with a ferocity that seemed unnecessary. "Mom?" I asked, setting the plates down. She jumped. "Oh, you startled me." "Sorry, I just wanted to see if you needed help." No, I have got it. You go on. You have a long drive." I turned to leave, but stopped when I heard Dad's voice. He had come into the kitchen through the side door that led to the garage, his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't see me standing in the shadow of the pantry. I know, he was saying, his voice a harsh whisper. "Look, the payment is scheduled. I just need a few more days to move some funds around. The adjustable rate kicked in and it—" "Yes, I know what the contract says." He paused, listening. "Harbor Point has always been— Look, I thought we had a grace period. Caro said, fine, Monday, I will have it on Monday." He hung up, slamming the phone down on the counter. He looked pale, older. "Richard?" Mom asked, turning around. "Was that them?" "Vultures," Dad hissed. "Damn vultures. They say the equity line is underwater because of the appraisal shift. They want a balloon payment to cover the variance." "How much?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. 12,000. By Monday." My breath caught in my throat. Harbor Point Capital. I knew that name. I saw it on eviction notices and foreclosure filings every single week. They were a predatory lender, notorious for bait-and-switch tactics and burying homeowners in fees they couldn't understand. I stepped out of the shadows. "Dad?" He spun around, his face flushing red with embarrassment and then anger. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," I said, stepping forward. "Harbor Point?" "Dad, those are the guys I fight in court. They are sharks. What kind of loan did you sign?" "It is none of your business," he snapped. "It is a standard home equity line. We needed some liquidity for the renovations last year." "Did you read the terms?" I asked, urgent. "They usually hide an arbitration clause and a variable rate trigger on page 40. If they are asking for a balloon payment now, they might be accelerating the loan. I can look at it. I can review the documents for you." "You?" Dad laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Review the documents? Madeline, please, this is complex financial structuring. It is not some tenant dispute in a basement apartment. I am a lawyer. Dad, I know consumer protection law. Harbor Point is—" "Gregory Caro handled it," Dad shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. "He set it up. He said it was a smart move to leverage the equity." "Do you think you know better than Gregory Caro? A man who has been practicing high-end law since you were in diapers? Caro is a probate and corporate guy. He doesn't do consumer finance," I argued. "Dad, please, let me just look at it. If they are threatening you—" "Stop," Mom said, shrinking back against the sink. "Please, stop. We do not need your help, Madeline," Dad said, his voice cold and final. "We have real lawyers. Go home. Go back to your work." The dismissal was physical. It hit me in the chest like a closed fist. He would rather be fleeced by a shark in a suit than accept help from his own daughter, simply because he did not respect the kind of law I practiced. "Fine," I said, my voice shaking. "Fine, but be careful. Please." I walked out the back door without saying goodbye to Jenna or Nathan. I could not bear another second of their suffocating success. I drove fast, the dark roads blurring past. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. It was not just the insult. It was the fear. If my parents were tangled up with Harbor Point, they were in trouble, real trouble, and they were too proud to let me save them. I needed to stop. I needed to breathe. I pulled into the parking lot of the courthouse downtown. It was deserted at this hour, save for a few cleaning crew vans. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Failure, I whispered to the empty car. Disappointment. A tap on my window made me jump. I looked up, heart hammering, to see a weathered face peering in. It was Mr. Henderson. I rolled down the window. "Ms. Butler?" he asked, his voice raspy. He was wearing a thick coat that had seen better days, holding a plastic bag of groceries. "Mr. Henderson," I said, wiping my eyes quickly. "What are you doing here so late?" "Night shift," he said, pointing toward the janitorial entrance. I just wanted to say thank you again. For the apartment, the landlord, he came by today to fix the heat. Actually fixed it. Didn't say a word about kicking us out." I forced a smile. "That is the law. Mr. Henderson, he has to." "Yeah, well," the old man smiled, revealing a gap in his teeth. "Laws don't mean much without someone to speak 'em. You stood tall for us. Ms. Butler, my grandkids, they got a warm place to sleep tonight 'cause of you. You're a good one, a real fighter." He patted the doorframe of my car, gave me a nod, and shuffled off toward the building entrance. I watched him go. A real fighter. Inside the house on the ridge, I was a joke, a cautionary tale. But here, on the cracked pavement under a flickering street lamp, I was the difference between a warm bed and the street. The affirmation warred with the humiliation in my gut. Why wasn't this enough? Why did Mr. Henderson's gratitude feel like a consolation prize compared to my father's approval? My phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. I dreaded looking at it, fearing a text from Dad telling me to never eavesdrop again. It was a call. Aunt Jo. Jo was Dad's younger sister, the black sheep of the older generation. She lived in a clutter of cats and books on the south side, and rarely came to the dinners. I picked up. "Aunt Jo, is everything okay? I heard you were at the house tonight." Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "I assume it was the usual firing squad?" I let out a shaky laugh. "You could say that. Dad is... Dad. Listen to me. Maddie." Joe's tone shifted. It dropped an octave, becoming serious in a way I hadn't heard before. "I don't have long. My battery is dying. But I needed to tell you something. I was thinking about your grandmother tonight." "Mom brought her up too," I said. "It was weird. Ruth loved you, Maddie. You know that, right? She was so proud of you for going to law school, for doing the hard work. Dad says she was disappointed I didn't go corporate, that she thought I was wasting my talent. Your father," Joe spat the word, "rewrites history to suit his ego. Ruth wanted more for you than you know. She told me, right before the end. She said she wanted to arm you. That was the word she used. Arm her." "Arm me? With what?" "She left everything to the estate. And the estate was empty." "Was it?" Joe whispered. "I heard things, Maddie, back then, before Caro shut everyone up. There was a file, a sealed something, a codicil, maybe, or a letter." "A sealed codicil?" "Joe, probate is public record. If there was a codicil, it would be in the file." "Unless it wasn't filed," Joe said, "or unless it was buried. Ruth didn't trust the markets, Maddie, and she didn't trust Caro as much as your father thinks. She had secrets, and I think she left one for you." The line crackled. "What do you mean?" I asked, my grip on the phone tightening. "I mean, do not let them make you feel small," Joe said. "You are the only one of them who is actually like her. Dig, Maddie. You are a lawyer. Dig." The call cut off. I sat there in the dark, the silence of the courthouse parking lot pressing in on me. Sealed something. Harbor Point. Caro. My father called me a failure. My siblings called me a joke. But Grandma Ruth? She had wanted to arm me. I looked up at the looming shadow of the courthouse. Tomorrow. I had to fight for a tenant in courtroom 3B, but tonight, for the first time in years, I felt a different kind of fight waking up inside me. A fight for myself. I put the car in gear and drove home, the humiliating laughter of the dinner table slowly fading, replaced by the whisper of a ghost who demanded justice. The Tupperware container on my passenger seat was filled with beef stew I had made 2 days ago, but it was not really dinner. It was a passport. It was the only valid visa I had to cross the border back into the territory of my parents' house on the ridge, without immediately triggering a defensive war. 2 days had passed since the disastrous dinner, and the knot in my stomach had not loosened. It had tightened, calcifying into a hard, cold stone of dread. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my father's whispered panic on the phone. 12,000. By Monday. I pulled into the driveway. The house loomed large and pristine, a monument to the kind of stability that was supposed to be unshakable, but I knew better. I knew what rot looked like in a foundation, and I knew that by the time you saw the cracks in the drywall, the termites had already eaten the beams. I grabbed the stew and walked to the door. I did not knock. I used my key, the metal feeling cold and heavy in my hand. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, stepping into the foyer. My mother appeared from the living room, looking startled. She was wearing her reading glasses, a paperback held loosely in her hand. "Madeline, is everything all right? You did not say you were coming." "I made too much stew," I lied, holding up the container. "I thought you and Dad might want some for lunch tomorrow. It is the recipe Grandma Ruth used to make." The mention of Ruth softened her expression, just as I hoped it would. "Oh, that is sweet of you. Honey, your father is in the den." I walked to the kitchen, set the container on the granite island, and then turned to her. I needed to do this quickly, before I lost my nerve. "Mom, I need to see the papers." Her smile faltered. "What papers?" "The Harbor Point loan," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I heard what Dad said on the phone the other night. I know he's worried about the balloon payment. Please, just let me look at them. I am not trying to start a fight. I just want to make sure you are safe." "Madeline, really? Your father said—" "I know what Dad said," I interrupted gently. "He said, I do not understand business, but this is not business. Mom, this is a contract, and reading contracts is the one thing I do better than anyone in this family. Please." She looked toward the den, biting her lip. Then, with a sigh that seemed to deflate her entire posture, she walked over to the neatly organized mail hutch by the fridge. She pulled out a thick, glossy folder and slid it across the counter. "He will be furious if he finds out," she whispered. "I will handle him." I promised. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had been humiliated 48 hours prior, and opened the folder. The logo of Harbor Point Capital was embossed in gold on the front, a lighthouse beaming a ray of light over calm waters. It was an image of safety. The documents inside were a roadmap to a shipwreck. I began to read, my finger tracing the lines of dense, single-spaced text. I slipped into my professional fugue state, the part of my brain that could dismantle a landlord's lease agreement in 3 minutes flat. Page 1. Promissory note. Page 3. Truth in lending disclosure. Page 12. The adjustable rate rider. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "Oh no," I whispered. "What?" Mom asked, hovering over my shoulder. "The teaser rate," I said, pointing to a paragraph buried in the middle of page 7. "Look at this. They started you at 3%, which looks great, but it is not fixed. It is pegged to an index plus a margin of 6%, and there is a reset clause." I flipped the page. "Here, the reset happened last month. That is why your payment jumped. But it gets worse. Mom, look at the amortization schedule." I showed her the table of numbers. "You are not paying down the principal. You are negatively amortizing. The monthly payment they set up for you does not even cover the interest. The unpaid interest gets added to the loan balance. You owe more today than you did when you signed this 2 years ago." "But Gregory said it was a standard equity release," Mom stammered. "He said it would free up cash for the renovation." "Gregory Caro is either incompetent or he did not read this," I said, my voice hardening. "And look at this." I turned to the back of the packet, page 42, Mandatory Binding Arbitration. I read the clause. It was draconian. It waived the right to a jury trial. It waived the right to participate in a class action. It required any dispute to be settled by an arbitrator chosen by the lender. In a venue chosen by the lender, it was the legal equivalent of locking the doors and turning up the music so no one could hear you scream. "What are you doing?" My father's voice thundered from the doorway. I did not flinch. I did not look up like a scolded child. I kept my finger on the arbitration clause and turned my head slowly to face him. "I am saving you from losing this house," I said. Richard Butler stormed into the kitchen, his face a mottled red. "I told you to stay out of my affairs. Madeline, give me that." He reached for the folder, but I pressed my hand down on it. "Dad, listen to me," I said, my voice sharp and authoritative. "This loan is predatory. It is a negative amortization product with a balloon trigger. They designed this to fail. They knew that once the rate reset, you would not be able to make the payments, and then they could hit you with the penalty fees and seize the equity. You are being paranoid," he scoffed. Though he did not pull the folder away. "It is a bridge loan. We are refinancing next year when the market stabilizes." "You cannot refinance," I said. "Read page 15. There is a prepayment penalty of 4% if you refinance within the first 5 years. It would cost you $20,000 just to get out of this loan." Silence filled the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. 4%? Dad whispered. He looked at Mom. "Gregory said the penalty expired after 12 months. "Gregory was wrong," I said. "Or he lied. Dad, you need to get out of this. We need to go to a local credit union immediately. I can help you draft a demand letter to challenge the disclosure terms. There are statutes, TILA, RESPA, that might give us a hook to rescind the loan if they messed up the paperwork." Dad stared at the papers, his jaw working. For a second, I thought he was going to thank me. I thought he was going to see me, really see me, as the expert in the room. Then, the walls came back up. "You are overreacting," he said, straightening his spine. "You see villains everywhere because that is all you deal with in that legal aid clinic. This is Harbor Point Capital. They are a reputable firm. Gregory Caro has done business with them for 20 years. He said this was a smart move to leverage our assets." "Dad, the document says—" "I do not care what your interpretation is," he shouted. "You handle evictions for people who cannot hold down a job. You do not understand high-level finance. You do not understand how business works. Gregory Caro is one of the most respected attorneys in the state. You think you found something he missed? You?" The word hung in the air. You? It was a dismissal so total, it felt like a slap. I read the words on the page. "Dad," I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. "The words do not care about Gregory Caro's reputation. The words say you are walking into a trap. Go home. Madeline," he said, turning his back to me. "Take your stew and go home. We will handle our finances, and we will listen to the attorney we actually pay." I looked at Mom. She had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and wet. She did not speak. She did not defend me. I walked out of the house without another word. I left the stew on the counter. The next morning, the legal aid office felt different. Usually, it was a place of frantic energy that drained me. Today, it felt like a bunker, a place where I knew the rules and where the enemy was clearly defined. I threw my bag on my desk and sat down, my heart still bruised from the night before. Diego, my desk neighbor and the closest thing I had to a work friend, rolled his chair over. "You look like you went 12 rounds with a heavyweight," he observed. Just my father, I muttered. Same thing. Ah, the family joy, he said sympathetically. Well, I have something to take your mind off it. New intake, just hit your queue, housing dispute, potential foreclosure, sounds messy. He dropped a file on my desk. Alice Monroe versus Harbor Point Capital. I stared at the label. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. Or perhaps it was not humor. Perhaps it was momentum. I opened the file. Alice Monroe was a 72-year-old retired nurse. She lived in a small bungalow on the east side, a house she had owned free and clear for 30 years until her husband got sick and they needed cash for medical bills. I read her intake form. She had taken out a senior equity release loan 2 years ago. 2 years ago, same time frame as my parents. I flipped to the loan documents attached to the complaint. My eyes scanned the familiar layout. The same gold lighthouse logo. The same font. Page 7. Adjustable rate rider. Page 42. Mandatory binding arbitration. The language was identical. Not just similar. Identical. The same predatory terms. The same negative amortization trap. It was a cookie-cutter scam. Mass-produced to strip equity from anyone vulnerable enough to sign. I turned to the signature page. Alice's signature was shaky, written in blue ballpoint pen. Below it was the notary block. State of New York. County of Halcyon. Subscribed and sworn to before me this 14th day of May. The stamp was crisp and clear. Tyler Reed. Notary Public. I frowned. I flipped back to my notes from the night before. The mental photograph I had taken of my parents' loan documents. My parents had signed their loan on May 14th as well. I closed my eyes, visualizing the notary block on my parents' kitchen table. Tyler Reed. I opened my eyes and grabbed a yellow legal pad. Diego, I said, my voice tight. Does the name Tyler Reed ring a bell? Reed? Diego scratched his beard. Yeah, maybe. I think he shows up on a lot of the foreclosure paperwork from the Delaney firm. Why? Because he notarized this client's loan, I said, and I am 99% sure he notarized my parents' loan on the same day. Small world, Diego shrugged. Halcyon Springs has a population of 400,000, I said. There are thousands of notaries, and my parents live on the ridge. Alice Monroe lives in East Halcyon. That is a 40-minute drive. And according to this timestamp, these documents were signed 30 minutes apart. Diego stopped typing. He swiveled his chair fully toward me. That is impossible, unless he has a helicopter. Or, I said, a cold chill running down my spine. He was not at either house. He was sitting in an office somewhere, stamping a stack of papers that someone else put in front of him. Robo-signing, Diego whispered. That is fraud, Maddie. That voids the instrument. I know, I said. I looked down at Alice Monroe's file. I need to talk to her. I met Aunt Jo for lunch at a diner halfway between the courthouse and her apartment. It was the kind of place that smelled of bacon grease and stale coffee, a sanctuary from the pretension of the ridge. Jo was nursing a cup of black coffee when I slid into the booth opposite her. She looked like my father around the eyes, but everything else was different. Her hair was a wild gray frizzle, and she wore a denim jacket covered in enamel pins. You look intense, she said by way of greeting. Did you find something? I found a lot of things, I said. Jo, Dad is in trouble. He signed a loan with Harbor Point. It is a trap, and I think the same people who trapped him are trapping my clients. Jo sighed, shaking her head. Richard always did think he was too smart to be conned. That is his fatal flaw. He thinks because he wears a tie. He's part of the club. He never realized the club eats people like him for breakfast. He said Caro advised him, I said. He trusts Caro more than he trusts me. Gregory Caro. Jo said the name like a curse word. That man is a snake in a silk suit. Ruth hated him by the end. Dad says she trusted him implicitly. Dad lies, Jo said flatly. Or he believes the lie because it is easier. Ruth spent her last year trying to untangle her money from the mess Caro had put it in. She used to talk to me about it. We would sit on her porch, and she would get so angry. She said the law was supposed to be a shield for the weak, but men like Caro turned it into a sword for the rich. I leaned forward. You said on the phone that she wanted to arm me. What did you mean? Joe looked around the diner, then leaned in closer. About a month before she died, Ruth told me she had made a change. She said she was tired of watching Jenna and Nathan prance around like peacocks while you were drowning in student loans to do the work she actually respected. My throat tightened. She said that? She said, Madeline is the only one who understands what justice costs, and I am going to make sure she can afford to pay the price. She told me she wrote a letter, a specific set of instructions. She called it her insurance policy. Instructions for what? For her estate, Joe said. She said she gave it to Caro to file, a codicil. She wanted to set up a trust, a specific kind of trust. But Caro said there was no money, I argued. He said the investments tanked. Did they tank? Joe raised an eyebrow. Or did they just disappear? After the funeral, when I asked Caro about the letter, he looked me dead in the eye and said, Ruth was confused at the end. The markets wiped her out. There is no trust. Josephine, just debts. And you believed him? I didn't have proof. Maddie, and I didn't have the fight in me. Your father was so desperate to wrap everything up and pretend everything was fine. He didn't want to hear that his mother might have hidden money from him to give to you. It would have broken his brain. So he buried it, I whispered. He let Caro bury it, Joe corrected. But the dead have a way of clawing their way back out. If you are seeing Harbor Point and Caro connected, Maddie, you need to pull the thread. If I pull it, I said, it might destroy my parents' finances. If Caro is dirty, and he handled Dad's loan, then better you destroy it and rebuild it than let strangers burn it down, Joe said firmly. You are the lawyer. Be the lawyer. I did not go back to the office immediately. I went to the Hall of Records. The probate clerk's office was in the basement of the courthouse, a room that smelled of dust and decaying paper. But I didn't need the physical files yet. I needed the index. I sat at one of the public terminals and logged in with my bar credentials. Search. Butler. Ruth E. Date of death. November 12, 2022. The screen populated with a list of docket entries. Petition for probate, inventory and appraisal, order for final distribution. It all looked standard. The estate was closed. The value listed was negligible, barely enough to cover the debts. Just as Dad had said, but I scrolled back. I looked at the dates. Ruth died on November 12th. The petition for probate was filed on November 20th by Gregory Caro. I looked for filings in the week leading up to her death. Sometimes attorneys filed things preemptively. Nothing. I expanded the search parameters. I looked for correspondence or supplemental filings within the 6-month window after her death. There, entry 402. Notice of lodging. Sealed document. Filed. December 2nd, 2022. It was just a line item, no description of what the document was. Just sealed document. I clicked on the entry. Status. Sealed. Access restricted. Attorney of record. Gregory Caro. Why would a bankrupt estate have a sealed document filed 3 weeks after the death? If there was no money, what was there to hide? I pulled up the metadata for the filing. It was associated with a supplemental notice of intent. I felt a prickle of sweat on the back of my neck. In probate court, you only sealed things that contained sensitive personal information or trade secrets, or if you convinced a judge that releasing it would cause undue harm. What harm could a dead woman's will cause? I took a screenshot of the docket entry, then I printed it. I walked out of the courthouse and sat on a bench in the late afternoon sun. I pulled out my phone. I knew the number for Caro Associates by heart. It was on the fridge at my parents' house. I dialed. Caro and Associates, how may I direct your call? The voice was smooth, professional, and indifferent. This is Madeline Butler, I said, keeping my voice even. I am an attorney, and I am calling regarding the estate of Ruth Butler, case number P22409. There was a pause, the clicking of a keyboard. "One moment, Ms. Butler." I waited. The hold music was Vivaldi. It felt mocking. A minute passed, then two. Finally, the line clicked. It wasn't Caro. It was a woman's voice, sharp and brittle. "Ms. Butler? This is Sarah. Mr. Caro's senior paralegal. I have the file in front of me. That matter was closed 3 years ago." "What is this regarding?" "I am looking at the docket," I said. "Entry 402. A sealed document filed on December 2nd, 2022. I would like a copy." "That document is sealed by court order," Sarah said, her tone dropping 10 degrees. "We cannot release it." "I am a beneficiary of the estate," I lied. Technically, I wasn't, since I got nothing, but I was an heir at law. "And I am an attorney. I have reason to believe that document pertains to a testamentary instrument that was not properly executed." "Ms. Butler," Sarah snapped, "Mr. Caro handled your grandmother's estate with the utmost care. There were no assets. The sealed document was a private personal matter regarding medical history. It has no bearing on distribution." "Medical history is usually redacted, not sealed in its entirety," I countered. "And why would it be filed 3 weeks post-mortem?" "Look, I can file a motion to unseal it. I am just trying to save us all the time." "If you just tell me—" "We do not discuss closed files," she interrupted. "And frankly, Ms. Butler, digging up old family graves is rarely a good career move. Mr. Caro considers this matter settled. I suggest you do the same." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is professional advice," she said. "Do not stir up trouble where there is none. Good day." Click. I stared at the phone. Medical history. That was a lie. You don't file medical history as a notice of lodging after the client is dead. You file a will or a codicil. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Not anymore. They were shaking with rage. I looked at the printout in my hand. Sealed document. I thought about Alice Munro, sitting in her kitchen, terrified of losing her home. I thought about my father, arrogant and blind, walking into a financial buzzsaw. And I thought about Grandma Ruth, who wanted to arm me. I stood up. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered to the busy street. "Consider me armed." I walked back toward the legal aid office. I had a motion to draft for Alice Munro, and in that motion, I was going to list every single irregularity I could find, and I was going to subpoena the notary records of Tyler Reed. If I couldn't open the door to Ruth's estate yet, I would break a window in Harbor Point's house, and I had a feeling that once the glass shattered, I would find that the same wind was blowing through both rooms. The basement of the Halcyon Springs Hall of Records smelled of vinegar and decaying adhesive. It was a scent that most people found repulsive, but to me, it was the smell of truth waiting to be exhaled. For the past 4 nights. I had come here straight from the legal aid office, trading one pile of misery for another. I sat at a scratched wooden table in the back corner, hidden behind a stack of red-welled folders that towered like a fortress. My laptop screen cast a blue glow on my face as I entered another data point into my spreadsheet. Row 43, borrower, Samuel P. Higgins, lender, Harbor Point Capital, loan type, equity release/adjustable, notary, Tyler Reed, notary, location, Halcyon Springs. Date, June 12, 2021. I rubbed my eyes. Tyler Reed. The man was a machine, according to the timestamps on the documents I had pulled. Mr. Reed had notarized a loan closing in North Halcyon at 2 in the afternoon, and another in South Halcyon at 2:15. Unless he had discovered teleportation, Tyler Reed was a phantom, but the notary fraud was just the smoke. I was looking for the fire. I picked up the next file. It was a foreclosure action from last year. Harbor Point was represented, as usual, by the massive regional firm Delaney Price. They were the heavy hitters, the kind of firm that buried underfunded opponents in paper until they suffocated. I turned to the signature page of the complaint. There was the signature of the lead partner from Delaney. But my eyes drifted down to the footer. to the fine print that usually listed the firm's various offices. There, in font size 8, was a list of local council affiliates. I squinted. I had seen this page a dozen times, but I had never really read the bottom. I ran my finger along the names. Halcyon Springs Division, Gregory Caro. Of council. My breath hitched. I pulled another file, a different foreclosure. 2 years older. I checked the footer. Local council, Gregory Caro. I pulled a third. It was there every time. My family's trusted advisor, the man who had sat at our dinner table and toasted to my father's health, was not just a probate attorney, he was on the payroll of the very predatory lender that was currently bleeding my parents dry. He wasn't just negligent in advising my father to take the Harbor Point loan. He was incentivized. I sat back, the plastic chair digging into my spine. The betrayal was so precise, so calculated, it made me nauseous. Caro had steered my parents into a trap he helped build, likely collecting a referral fee on the front end and a retainer on the back end. And if he was doing this to his friends, what had he done to my grandmother? The next morning, the coffee in the office break room tasted like burnt rubber. I stood by the pot, staring at the wall, my mind racing with the connections I had made in the basement. "You have that look," Diego said, walking in with his own mug. "The look that says you are about to do something stupid." "I found a link," I said, keeping my voice low. "Caro is listed as local counsel for Delaney Price on the Harbor Point files. He is on their team. Diego, he is literally working for the lender." Diego let out a low whistle. "That is a conflict of interest so big you could drive a truck through it. Does your father know?" "He would not believe me if I told him," I said bitterly. "He would say I am misinterpreting standard business relationships. But it gets worse. The notary, Tyler Reed? I tracked him. He is notarizing documents for Caro's probate filings, too. I found his stamp on a deed transfer Caro handled 3 years ago." "Okay," Diego said, setting his mug down. "So you have a dirty notary and a conflicted attorney. That is a strong case, Maddie, but you need to be careful." "Careful is what got my parents into this mess," I snapped. "No," Diego said, his face serious. "Careful is what keeps you employed. Listen to me. Delaney Price is a powerhouse. Caro is a pillar of the local bar association. If you go after them, really go after them, accusing them of fraud and racketeering, they will not just fight the case, they will fight you." He pointed a finger at me. "You have a mark on your record. Maddie, that missed deadline from 5 years ago? They will dig that up. They will paint you as incompetent, bitter, and unstable. They will file a counter-complaint with the bar. And this office? We rely on state grants. If we start a war with the biggest donors in the county, the board might just decide we are too much trouble." "So I should do nothing?" I asked. "I should let them take Alice Monroe's house? Let them bankrupt my parents?" "I am saying make sure you do not miss," Diego said. "If you shoot at the king, you better kill him, because if you wound him, he will burn this whole place down." I knew he was right. I felt the old fear creeping in, the memory of that disciplinary hearing 5 years ago, the shame of standing before the panel and admitting I had failed. It was the scar tissue that my family loved to poke. But then I thought of the spreadsheet, row after row of names, people who had lost everything because men like Caro viewed the law as a mechanism for extraction rather than protection. "I will not miss," I said. Sunday brunch was a Butler family tradition that I usually avoided like a contagious disease. But today, I needed to be there. I needed to gauge the temperature. We met at Le Jardin, a pretentious spot with overpriced eggs and mimosas that cost more than my hourly wage. The sun was shining, casting a deceptively cheerful light on the patio where my family held court. "Madeline, you look intense," Jenna said as I sat down. She was wearing sunglasses that probably cost $500. "Relax. Have a mimosa." "I am fine," I said, unfolding my napkin. "Just busy with work." "Still saving the world one eviction at a time?" Nathan asked, scrolling on his phone. Something like that, I said. I looked at my parents. Dad looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that the bright sunlight could not hide. Mom was jittery, tearing her croissant into tiny pieces without eating them. How is the house situation? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Dad stiffened. It is handled. I spoke to Gregory. He is arranging a forbearance. A forbearance just delays the pain, Dad, I said gently. It usually capitalizes the interest. We trust Gregory, Mom said quickly, her eyes pleading with me to stop. I took a breath. Speaking of Gregory, I was looking through some old records. For work, I came across the file for Grandma Ruth's estate. The table went silent. Nathan put his phone down. Why were you looking at Grandma's file? Jenna asked, her voice sharp. I had a feeling, I said. And I found a docket entry, a sealed document filed 3 weeks after she died. Did Caro ever mention that to you? Sealed document? Dad frowned. No, he said everything was open and shut. It was not, I said. There is something in that file. Dad, a codicil, a letter, something Ruth wanted us to see, or maybe something she wanted me to see. Oh, here we go, Nathan groaned, rolling his eyes. I knew it. Knew what? I asked. You are broke, Nathan said, leaning forward. You are drowning in student loans. You drive a piece of junk car, and you are bitter that Jenna and I are successful. So now you are inventing some conspiracy theory that Grandma secretly left you a pot of gold. It is not about money, I said, my voice rising. It is about the truth. Aunt Jo told me. Aunt Jo is a loon, Jenna interrupted. She has 20 cats and thinks the government is spying on her through the television. You are listening to her? She told me Ruth wanted to arm me, I persisted. She said Ruth didn't trust Caro. That is enough, Dad snapped. People at the next table looked over. He lowered his voice, but the anger vibrated in his tone. Madeline, you are embarrassing yourself. You are digging for money because you failed to make any of your own. You chose your path. You chose to work for peanuts. Do not blame us. And do not blame Gregory Caro for your poor life choices. I am not digging for money, I said, feeling the familiar sting of tears. I am digging for justice. Caro is not who you think he is. He represents Harbor Point. He is playing both sides. He helped us, Mom blurted out. We all looked at her. What do you mean? I asked. After Ruth died, Mom said, her voice trembling, there were irregularities, tax issues, complications with the title transfers. Gregory made them go away. He said if we poked around, the IRS would come down on us. He said if we just let him handle it, he could smooth it over, and he did. He smoothed it over by burying her wishes, I said. Realizing the leverage Caro had used, he had scared them into compliance. He saved the estate from bankruptcy, Dad insisted. He is a friend of this family, and you are just trying to destroy relationships because you are miserable. Stop it, Madeline, stop it now, or do not come back to this table. I looked at them, my brother and sister, sneering with contempt, my parents, huddled in fear and denial. They were terrified. They were terrified that their success was fragile, that their trusted advisor was a predator, and that the daughter they labeled a failure was the only one seeing the world clearly. I am not the one who is blind, I said. I stood up, leaving my untouched meal, and walked away. The next day, I called in sick. I wasn't sick, but I had a meeting that I couldn't put on the office calendar. I had tracked down Bethany Reynolds through a friend of a friend who worked in legal staffing. Bethany was Caro's executive secretary for 30 years before she was abruptly retired 2 years ago. She agreed to meet me at a park bench near the duck pond in West Halcyon. She was a small woman with sharp blue eyes and a grip on her purse that suggested she expected someone to try and snatch it. You look like her, Bethany said as I sat down. Ruth, around the eyes? Thank you, I said. I loved her very much. She was a pistol, Bethany said, throwing a piece of bread to a mallard. Sharp as a tack, right up to the end. Do not let anyone tell you she was senile. That was the narrative Gregory tried to spin, but it was a lie. Why would he lie? I asked. Bethany turned to me. Because she changed her mind. About 6 months before she died. She came into the office. She was angry. She had been reading about your work. She had clippings from the local paper. That time you sued the slumlord on 4th Street? She had it taped to her fridge. She told me, I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading in my chest. I didn't know that. She said, my granddaughter is doing the work of angels for the pay of paupers, and she said she was tired of her other grandchildren treating the world like an ATM. Bethany paused. She wrote a letter. She dictated it to me, actually, and then she wrote a codicil by hand. What was in it? She wanted to set up a trust, Bethany said. The Service of Justice Trust. She called it. It was specific. It wasn't just a handout. It was a reward. It was for any grandchild who dedicated 10 years to public interest law or legal aid. It was meant to pay off their debts and give them a nest egg. My heart hammered. 10 years. I had just hit my 10-year mark last month. What happened to the codicil? I asked. She gave it to Gregory, Bethany said, her lips thinning. She told him to file it. I remember the day. Gregory looked at it and laughed. He said, Ruth, this is sentimental clutter. You are going to waste your estate on a cause that doesn't pay? And she told him to do his damn job, Bethany said. But after she died, well, Gregory called me into his office. He had the file. He told me the codicil was defective and that the assets were needed to cover administrative costs. He told me to shred the draft I had typed. Did you? I shredded the copy, Bethany said, but I know he didn't file the original, or if he did, he buried it under a seal so deep no one would look. He told the family there was no money, but I saw the accounts. Madeline, Ruth wasn't broke. She had bonds. She had certificates. Gregory moved them. Moved them where? I don't know, Bethany said. That was when he let me go. Said he needed a more modern approach. But I know this. Gregory Caro hates nothing more than losing control, and Ruth's codicil took control away from him. She reached out and patted my hand. Get that sealed document unsealed, honey, and you will find your grandmother waiting for you. I returned to the office that night. Fueled by Bethany's words, I pulled up Alice Monroe's file. I was going to draft a subpoena for Tyler Reed's notary journal. I was going to burn the midnight oil. At 9:30, my email chimed. From unknown sender, subject. Look deeper. I hesitated. Spam? Phishing? I hovered the mouse over the preview. There was an attachment. PDF. internal_memo_HP_22.pdf. I opened it. It was a scanned document on Harbor Point letterhead. It was dated 2 years ago. To Regional Sales Team from VP of Originating Documentation Efficiency Team. We are falling behind on the quarterly targets. The bottleneck in the closing process is unacceptable. Effective immediately. We are implementing a pre-notarization workflow with our preferred vendors. Ensure all borrower signatures are obtained on the primary dates. The notary attestations can be batch processed at the end of the week. Please route all Halcyon Springs files through the Caro channel for expedited handling. My mouth fell open. Pre-notarization. Batch processed. The Caro channel. It was a confession. It was a written instruction to commit fraud. They were admitting to having borrowers sign documents without a notary present, and then having the notary, Tyler Reed, stamp them later in bulk, and they were funneling it all through Caro. I scrolled down. There was another memo. Distressed asset strategy. Target demographics. Elderly. Equity rich. Cash poor. Push the adjustable product. Use the renovation pitch. Once the reset hits, offer forbearance with capitalized interest. The goal is asset acquisition. not repayment. It was the playbook, the exact script they had used on my father, the renovation pitch. I sat back, staring at the screen. This wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was a RICO case. This was criminal conspiracy. I printed the emails. I didn't know who sent them. A disgruntled employee. Maybe someone who grew a conscience. But I didn't care. I pulled up a blank motion template. State of Halcyon, Superior Court, Alice Monroe versus Harbor Point Capital. I began to type. I didn't hold back. I detailed the pattern of notary fraud. I cited the timestamps. I attached the anonymous memos as Exhibit A, referencing them as evidence of systemic procedural defects. And then, I added the kicker. Motion to compel production of original wet ink loan files and motion to join necessary parties. I named Gregory Caro. I named his firm. I alleged that he was not merely acting as counsel, but was a material participant in the origination of fraudulent loan documents. I was crossing the Rubicon. Once I filed this, there was no going back. My family would be furious. Caro would come for my license. I hit file. The confirmation screen popped up. Filing accepted. 2 days later, the response came. But it wasn't a motion to dismiss from Delaney Price. It was a minute order from the court clerk. Notice of consolidation and assignment. The court, having reviewed the filings in case number CV 24109, Monroe v. Harbor Point, and noting the overlapping counsel and allegations regarding the administration of the estate of Ruth Butler, case number SHAPI-22-409, hereby consolidates matters for the purpose of an evidentiary hearing regarding attorney conduct and document integrity. Assigned judge, the Honorable Eleanor Hargrove. I stared at the paper. Consolidates? How did the court connect Alice Monroe to Ruth Butler? I hadn't formally linked them yet. Other than mentioning Caro, then I realized, the sealed document I had tried to access. The clerk must have flagged my inquiry, or the system noted the cross-reference of Caro's name in the suspect pile. Or perhaps Judge Hargrove, known for her eagle eye, had seen the motion naming Caro and pulled his other active or recently closed files. Eleanor Hargrove. My stomach did a flip. Judge Hargrove was a legend. She was terrifying. She was known as the guillotine for how quickly she cut off lawyers who wasted her time or played games with the rules. She had zero tolerance for incompetence, but even less for unethical behavior. If I was right, she would be my greatest ally. If I was wrong, if I couldn't prove the fraud, if the anonymous emails were inadmissible, if Caro outmaneuvered me, she would be the one to sign the order ending my career. I looked at the date set for the hearing. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to prepare for the fight of my life, and I had to do it while my family was undoubtedly sharpening their knives, ready to cut me out for good. I picked up the phone to call Diego. "We are going to war," I said. "With Caro?" he asked. "With everyone," I said. "And Judge Hargrove is the referee." "God help you," Diego whispered. "He better," I said, "because nobody else will." The notification that the court had consolidated Alice Monroe's foreclosure defense with the probate inquiry regarding the estate of Ruth Butler hit the electronic docketing system at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. By noon, the shockwave had traveled from the courthouse server to the sleek offices of Delaney Price, and finally, inevitably, to the group chat of the Butler family. This time, there were no jokes about burnt roasts or stock options. There was only a terrifying silence, followed by a summons. "Nathan. Mom's house, 7 p.m., mandatory." I sat at my desk, staring at the screen. The word mandatory triggered a reflex of obedience that I had spent 33 years honing. But beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. I was not going there to be scolded for a bad grade or a dented fender. I was going there as opposing counsel. I arrived right on time. The house on the ridge was blazing with light, every window glowing as if to ward off the darkness gathering at the edges of their carefully constructed reality. Nathan's car was there, and Jenna's SUV. They were waiting. When I walked in, nobody offered to take my coat. My mother was sitting on the edge of the sofa, shredding a tissue in her lap. My father stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, a glass of scotch in his hand that he was gripping tight enough to shatter. Nathan and Jenna sat in the 2 armchairs, flanking the room like sentinels. "Sit down, Madeline," Nathan said. It was not an invitation. I sat on the ottoman, the lowest seat in the room. I kept my back straight. "We saw the court order," Nathan began, his voice calm, reasonable, and utterly condescending. "And we spoke to Gregory Caro this afternoon. He is concerned, but mostly, he is confused, and frankly, so are we." "There is nothing to be confused about," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid thumping of my heart. "I filed a motion to compel evidence in a fraud case. The judge saw a connection to Grandma's estate and consolidated the matters. That is standard procedure when there are overlapping issues of fact." "Overlapping issues?" Jenna scoffed, crossing her legs. "You mean you dragging our family lawyer into a sordid little lawsuit about some old lady who didn't pay her bills?" "Alice Monroe paid her bills," I said, looking Jenna in the eye. "She was defrauded, just like Mom and Dad are being defrauded." "Stop it," Dad barked, the sudden volume making Mom jump. "I do not want to hear that word again. Gregory Caro is a friend. He has been a friend for 20 years, and you have publicly accused him of racketeering." "I accused him of civil conspiracy and fraud," I corrected. "Because I have evidence, Dad. I have emails. I have notary logs. He is hurting people." "He helped us," Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He helped us when we were drowning after Ruth died." "He didn't help you, Mom," I said softly. "He scared you. He told you the IRS was coming so you wouldn't ask questions about where Grandma's money went. That is not help. That is manipulation." "You are just jealous." Jenna spat the words out. "God, you are so transparent. Maddie, you didn't get a cut of the inheritance, so now you want to burn the whole thing down. It is pathetic. You are 33 years old, and you are still throwing a tantrum because Grandma didn't leave you a check." "It is not about the money," I said. "It is always about the money." Nathan stood up, pacing the room. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? I have a reputation in this town. Jenna has clients who know Caro, and now our sister is running around the courthouse filing lunatic motions that make us look like a family of grifters fighting over scraps. You are embarrassing us. Madeline, you are humiliating this family." "I am embarrassing you?" I stood up too, the anger flaring hot in my chest. "You sit here in this house, drowning in debt you don't understand, terrified of a lawyer who is stealing from you, and you are worried about your reputation? Dad is about to lose $40,000 to a balloon payment he can't afford, and you are worried about what people at the country club will think?" "We can afford it," Dad lied, his face turning purple. "You cannot," I said. "I saw the bank statements. Dad, I know you are moving money from your retirement account to cover the interest. That is financial suicide." "At least we have retirement accounts," Jenna shouted. "At least we built something." "What have you built, Madeline? A pile of student loan debt and a career representing losers? You are so desperate to be the hero, to be the good one, because you know you failed at everything else. You couldn't hack it in a real firm. You couldn't handle the pressure. So you went to legal aid where the bar is so low you can't trip over it." "That is not fair," I said, my voice shaking. "It is the truth," Jenna said, her voice cracking. "Do you think it is easy? Do you think I like working 80 hours a week? Do you think I like the pressure of being the one who has to succeed because you decided to take a vow of poverty? I carry this family's expectations. Maddie, me and Nathan, we carry the weight. And you? You just judge us. You sit on your high horse and judge us for wanting security, for wanting nice things, while we have to bail you out every time you can't make rent." I stared at her. I had never seen Jenna unravel. She was always the picture of cool, corporate perfection. But now, I saw the cracks. I saw the resentment. Not just that I was failing, but that I had opted out of the race she was killing herself to win. I have never asked you for rent, I said quietly. But you will, Nathan said. Eventually. That is the trajectory, isn't it? You are the disappointment. Madeline, we all know it. We just don't say it. But if you go through with this hearing, if you drag Caro and this family through the mud, you are done. You are out. The room fell silent. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then, Richard cleared his throat. He walked over to the desk in the corner and opened a drawer. He pulled out a checkbook. It does not have to be like this, he said, his voice dropping to a reasonable, transactional tone. We want to help you. Madeline, we know you are struggling. We know those loans are a burden. He uncapped a pen. Drop the motion, he said. Withdraw the filing against Caro. Tell the judge it was a misunderstanding. If you do that, Jenna and I have talked. We can help you with the student loans. Maybe $20,000? To start? I looked at the checkbook. Then I looked at my father. He wasn't offering me help. He was buying my silence. He was offering to pay me off, just like he thought Caro had paid off the problems with Grandma's estate. It was the ultimate insult. He thought my integrity had a price tag, and a low one at that. You think you can buy me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It is not buying you, Dad said. Writing the date. It is family supporting family. We just want this ugliness to end. The ugliness ends when the truth comes out, I said. Not when you write a check. I walked to the door. If you walk out that door, Nathan called after me. Do not expect us to be here when you crash. And you will crash, Madeline. You always do. I opened the door and walked out into the cold night air. I didn't look back. I got in my car. My hands shaking so hard I had to wait 5 minutes before I could turn the key. They had stripped me bare. They had used my deepest insecurities, my financial struggles, my career path, my past failures, as weapons. But as I drove away, I realized something. They were trying to stop me. You don't try to bribe a failure. You don't hold an intervention for a joke. You only fight this hard against a threat. For the first time in my life, I was dangerous to them. The next morning, I needed to remember why I was doing this. I couldn't go to the office. The fluorescent lights and the towering stack of files felt too much like the cage Jenna had described. I went to the courthouse, not to the records room, but to Department 402. I slipped into the back row of the gallery. The courtroom was paneled in dark mahogany, smelling of floor wax and old paper. It was a place of ritual and rules, a sanctuary from the messy, transactional chaos of my family's living room. Judge Eleanor Hargrove was on the bench. She was a small woman, perhaps in her late 60s, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. But her presence filled the room. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Mr. Henderson, she was saying to a landlord standing at the plaintiff's table, you are telling this court that you withheld the security deposit because of excessive wear and tear? Yes, Your Honor, the landlord said, puffing out his chest. The carpet was ruined. The carpet was 20 years old, Hargrove said, glancing at a photo in the file. The statutory life of a carpet is 10 years. You cannot charge a tenant for the replacement of something that had zero value. Judgment for the defendant. You will return the deposit in full, plus statutory damages for bad faith retention. Next case. I watched her for an hour. I watched her explain the rules of evidence to a terrified pro se litigant, guiding him gently through the process of authenticating a text message so he could prove he paid his rent. I watched her dress down a slick corporate attorney who tried to bury a tenant in procedural objections. Counsel, she had said, her voice cutting like a laser. The law is a tool for justice, not a game of hide and seek. Answer the question. She was magnificent. She was everything I wanted to be. She was the antidote to Gregory Caro. When the morning calendar concluded, the bailiff called all rise, and Hargrove swept out of the room. I waited until the gallery cleared. Soaking in the silence, I walked out into the hallway, my heels clicking on the marble floor, I felt steadier. My breath was coming easier. Ms. Butler? I froze. I turned around. Judge Hargrove was standing by the door to her chambers, holding a stack of files. She was looking at me over her glasses. Judge Hargrove, I stammered. I apologize. I was just observing. I saw you in the back, she said. Her eyes traveled down to the ID badge clipped to my lapel. Madeline Butler, legal aid. Butler, she said, testing the weight of the name. You are related to Ruth Butler? She was my grandmother, I said. A slow, genuine smile spread across the judge's face, softening the stern lines of her mouth. Ruth, my goodness, I haven't thought of her in years. Is she... She passed away 3 years ago, I said. I am sorry to hear that, Hargrove said. She shifted the files to her other arm. Your grandmother was a force of nature, back when I was a young public defender, before I took the bench. Ruth used to organize the tenant unions in the North District. She would march into city council meetings and make the mayor sweat. She did? I smiled, surprised. I had only known the grandmother who baked cookies and tended her garden. Oh, yes, Hargrove chuckled. I remember once, she stood up during a hearing on zoning laws. The developers were trying to push through a project that would have displaced 50 families. Ruth stood right in the center aisle and said, "This court is the only place where the small person can stand eye to eye with power. Do not make us blink." The quote hit me hard. The only place where the small person can stand eye to eye with power. She respected the law, Hargrove continued, her gaze sharpening. She believed that if you stripped away the money and the connections, the truth would win. It is a romantic notion. Perhaps, but it is one I try to keep alive in my courtroom. She looked at me closely, her eyes seeming to x-ray my soul. I see her name on a consolidated matter on my docket for next week, Hargrove said. I trust you are preparing diligently, Ms. Butler. I am, Your Honor, I said. Good, she said. The law needs more people who remember what Ruth knew. Power hates to be looked in the eye. Make sure you don't blink. She nodded once, turned, and disappeared into her chambers. I stood in the hallway for a long time. My father had told me I was a failure. My brother had told me I was a disappointment. But the most feared judge in the county had just told me I was the heir to a legacy of courage. I walked out of the courthouse with my head high. I was ready to work. Back at the office, I threw myself into the preparation. I turned the conference table into a war room. The spreadsheet of notary fraud was taped to the wall. The anonymous memos were organized into binders. I drafted outlines for cross-examination. Cross-exam. Gregory Caro. Goal. Establish knowledge of Harbor Point internal practices. Key question. Why was the sealed document filed 3 weeks post-mortem? I worked until midnight every night. I ate vending machine crackers for dinner. I lived on coffee and adrenaline. But as the hearing date approached, the adrenaline began to sour into anxiety. Late one night, I opened my personnel file. I didn't know why I did it. Masochism, maybe, or a need to confront the ghost. I pulled out the disciplinary reprimand. State Bar Association. In re. Madeline Butler. Finding. Failure to file within statutory limitations. Sanction. Public reprimand. I read the text. It described the client, a young man who had been wrongfully terminated. He had a slam-dunk case, and I had missed the deadline to file the complaint by 24 hours because the server crashed and I hadn't left a buffer. I remembered the phone call. I remembered having to tell him, "I am sorry, you can't sue. It is my fault." I remembered his silence. The way he just hung up. The shame washed over me, fresh and hot. My family was right. I had failed. I had hurt someone who trusted me. What if I did it again? What if I got into that courtroom with Caro and Delaney Price, and I missed something? What if I forgot an objection? What if I ruined Alice Monroe's life just like I ruined that young man's case? My hands started to shake. I couldn't breathe. The imposter syndrome was not a voice in my head. It was a physical weight on my chest. "Hey," Diego said. Walking into the conference room, it was late, but he had stayed to help me paginate the exhibits. I quickly closed the file. wiping my eyes. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, sitting down. "You look like you are seeing ghosts." "Just tired," I said. "Listen," Diego said. "I have been thinking, this hearing, it is going to be a bloodbath. Caro is going to come at you personally. They are going to try to rattle you." "I know," I said. "So, here's the plan," Diego said. "I will handle the lead. I will do the opening statement and the examination of Caro. You handle the documents and the technical arguments. I have 10 years on you. Maddie, I have a thicker hide. Let me take the heat." I looked at him, gratitude flooding my veins. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to hide behind him. I wanted to be the second chair. The safe one. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Positive," he smiled. "We are a team. I got your back." We spent the next 2 days prepping with that strategy. Diego would be the shield. I would be the sword. It felt manageable. I felt the panic recede. But the universe, it seemed, was not interested in making things easy for me. On the morning before the hearing, my phone rang at 6 a.m. "Maddie," Diego's voice was a rasp, a croak that sounded painful. "Diego?" I sat up in bed, my stomach dropping. "It is the flu," he wheezed. "Or food poisoning. I have been throwing up since 2 a.m. I can't stand up. I have a fever of 102. "Oh no," I whispered. "I'm so sorry," he groaned. "I tried to power through, but I can't. I can't be in court. I would pass out." "It is okay," I said, though my world was tilting on its axis. "Stay home. Rest. You have to ask for a continuance," Diego said. "Call the clerk. Tell them lead counsel is incapacitated. Get a postponement." "I will try," I said. I hung up and called the court clerk immediately. "Department 402, the clerk answered efficiently. "Hi, this is Madeline Butler. I am calling regarding the Harbor Point matter tomorrow. My co-counsel has fallen ill with a severe flu. We are requesting a continuance." "One moment," the clerk said. She put me on hold. The Vivaldi played again. She came back 2 minutes later. "Ms. Butler? I spoke to Judge Hargrove. The request is denied." "Denied?" I gasped. "But he is really sick." "The judge noted that you are the attorney of record on the initial filings," the clerk said, "and due to the expedited nature of the foreclosure stay and the probate consolidation, the court's calendar cannot accommodate a delay. The hearing proceeds tomorrow at 9 a.m. Be prepared." I hung up the phone. I was alone. There was no shield. There was no backup. It was just me, the failure, me, the disappointment, me, against the biggest firm in the region and my family's personal attorney, 5 miles away, in the plush conference room of Delaney Price. The atmosphere was very different. Gregory Caro sat at the head of a long glass table. He looked every inch the elder statesman, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit impeccably tailored. Next to him sat Victoria Lane, the lead litigator for Harbor Point. She was a shark in a Chanel suit, known for cross-examinations that left witnesses in tears. "So," Victoria said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the file, "the legal aid girl, Butler." "She is a nuisance," Caro said, waving a hand dismissively. "She is barely a lawyer. She works out of a strip mall clinic." "She filed a very detailed motion," Victoria noted. "She has the notary logs, and she has those internal memos. Do we know where she got those?" "Disgruntled former employee," Caro said. "Inadmissible, hearsay. We will move to strike them immediately." "And the probate angle?" Victoria asked. "She is claiming you suppressed a codicil." Caro's eyes narrowed. "She is fishing. There is no codicil on the record. It is a desperate attempt by a greedy grandchild who got cut out of the will." "That is the narrative, Victoria." "I like it," Victoria nodded. "We paint her as unstable, bitter. We bring up her disciplinary record." "Yes," Caro smiled. A cold, predatory expression. "The missed filing. We hammer that. We show the judge that she is incompetent. We framed this entire lawsuit as a personal vendetta against me because I advised her grandmother not to waste money on her. If she pushes too hard, Victoria added. We file a bar complaint, malicious prosecution, abuse of process. We threaten her license. She will fold, Caro said, leaning back. I know the family. They are weak. Her father is already eating out of my hand, begging me to fix his loan. The girl is the black sheep. She has no support, 1 hour of pressure, and she will break. Good, Victoria said, closing the file. Tomorrow, we end her. Back in my apartment, I sat on the floor, surrounded by binders. I was shaking. I was terrified. But then, I looked at the handwritten note I had found in my notes from the interview with Bethany. Ruth said, Madeline is the only one who understands what justice costs. I stood up. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. I looked at myself. I looked tired. I looked scared. But I also looked like her. Do not blink, I whispered to my reflection. I packed my briefcase. I put on my best suit, the one I had bought for the interviews I never got. I was going to walk into that courtroom alone, and I was going to burn their house down, or I was going to die trying. The heavy oak doors of Department 402 swung open with a groan that sounded like a judgment in itself. I walked through them, my briefcase heavy in my hand, and for a moment, the sheer density of the atmosphere stopped me in my tracks. Usually, a foreclosure hearing or a probate review would draw an audience of 0, perhaps a bored clerk and a sleeping bailiff. Today, the gallery was packed. To my left, taking up the front row like a defensive line, sat my family. My father, Richard, wore his best suit, but his tie was crooked, a rare crack in his armor. My mother sat next to him, clutching her purse with white-knuckled intensity. Jenna and Nathan were there, looking less like siblings and more like shareholders witnessing a hostile takeover, their faces masks of annoyed disbelief. To my right, the forces of Harbor Point Capital had assembled. It was a sea of navy blue wool and billable hours. Victoria Lane, their lead counsel, sat at the defense table with the posture of a queen regnant, flanked by 3 junior associates who were already organizing stacks of binders. Gregory Caro sat beside her, looking relaxed, chatting amiably with a man I recognized as the vice president of Harbor Point. But it was the back of the room that gave me the strength to keep walking. Alice Monroe was there, wearing her Sunday best, a small hat pinned to her gray hair. Next to her was Mr. Henderson, the tenant I had helped last week, and behind them were a dozen others, faces I recognized from the intake clinic, people I had helped keep in their homes or protect from debt collectors. They were silent, respectful, and watching me with an intensity that made my throat tight. They were the lost causes my family mocked, showing up to see if the system could actually work for them. I walked to the plaintiff's table. I was alone. No co-counsel, no paralegal, just me and my binders. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Judge Eleanor Hargrove emerged from her chambers. She moved with a swift, efficient energy, her black robe billowing slightly. She took the bench, adjusted her glasses, and looked out over the courtroom. Her gaze lingered for a moment on the crowded gallery, then settled on the attorneys. "Be seated," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "We are here on the consolidated matters of Monroe versus Harbor Point Capital and the in re estate of Ruth Butler," Hargrove began, opening the file before her. "The court has consolidated these matters due to the overlapping allegations regarding document integrity, notary fraud, and the conduct of counsel common to both matters." She looked over her reading glasses at the defense table. "The issues before me are grave," she continued. "Ms. Butler alleges that Harbor Point Capital engaged in a systematic pattern of robotic notarization and fraudulent inducement. Furthermore, she alleges that these practices extended to the administration of the Butler estate, specifically regarding a potential sealed codicil. The defense argues these are baseless claims driven by a family dispute. We will determine the truth today." She turned to me. "Ms. Butler, call your first witness." My hands were shaking as I stood up. I placed them flat on the table to steady them. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Tyler Reed. Tyler Reed looked nothing like the mastermind of a fraud ring. He was a young man, perhaps 25, wearing a suit that was slightly too large for him. He looked terrified. He walked to the witness stand, took the oath, and sat down, his eyes darting toward Gregory Caro. I approached the podium. I needed to be calm. I needed to be the opposite of the hysterical woman my family claimed I was. Mr. Reed, I began. You are a licensed notary public in the state of Halcyon. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice cracking. And during the years 2021 and 2022, were you employed by a mobile notary service contracted by Delaney and Price? I am showing you Exhibit A, I said, handing the bailiff a document. This is the loan agreement for Alice Monroe. Can you identify the signature and stamp on page 42? He looked at it. That is my signature, and my stamp. The date is May 14th, 2022, I said. Do you recall being at Ms. Monroe's home on that date? He hesitated. He looked at Victoria Lane, who was staring at him with icy neutrality. I do many signings, he stammered. It is hard to remember specific ones. Let me help your memory, I said. I have here a log of your notarizations for that day. Exhibit B. It shows you notarized 14 loan packages on May 14th. The timestamps indicate these notarizations occurred between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. I paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. Mr. Reed, is it physically possible for you to travel to 14 different homes in widely separated parts of the city and conduct 14 full loan closings in 60 minutes? Objection, Lane stood up smoothly. Argumentative. Overruled, Hargrove said. The math is the math. Answer the question, Mr. Reed. No, Tyler whispered. It is not possible. So, you were not present when these borrowers signed, I said. No. Where were you? I was at the offices of Delaney and Price, he said, looking down at his hands, in the conference room. And what were you doing? Stamping, he said softly. They gave me stacks. They said the borrowers had already signed with the loan officers, and I just needed to formalize them. They said it was standard procedure. Expedited processing. Who told you that? I asked. The paralegals, he said. And the attorneys. Which attorneys? Tyler swallowed hard. Mr. Caro and others. A ripple went through the gallery. I saw my father stiffen. Mr. Reed, I said, pressing the advantage. I want to ask you about a specific date, November 10th, 2022. Do you recall notarizing a document for the estate of Ruth Butler? Tyler's head snapped up. His eyes went wide. Yes, I remember that day. Why do you remember it? Because Mr. Caro called me personally, Tyler said. Usually I just dealt with the staff, but he called me and said he needed a rush job. He said it was sensitive. Did you go to Ruth Butler's house? No, Tyler said. I met Mr. Caro in the parking lot of the hospital. He had a folder. He had 2 documents. One was a modification to a Harbor Point loan. The other was a legal document, a codicil. I think, was Ruth Butler present? No, Tyler said. Mr. Caro said she was inside, resting. He said she had already signed them, but he forgot to bring me up to witness it. He said if I didn't stamp them right then, the filing deadline would pass and the estate would be in chaos. He said I would be helping the family. So you notarized a will codicil for a woman you did not see, based on the word of her attorney? Yes, Tyler whispered. He is Gregory Caro. I thought it was okay. Thank you. Mr. Reed, I said. No further questions. The silence in the room was heavy. I turned to look at my family. My mother had her hand over her mouth. My father was staring at the back of Caro's head, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Victoria Lane did a brief cross-examination, trying to paint Tyler as a rogue incompetent who failed to follow instructions. But the damage was done. The link was forged. Caro was the bridge between the predatory loans and the estate. "Call your next witness," Hargrove said. "I call Gregory Caro," I said. Caro stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He did not look worried. He looked annoyed, like a man forced to deal with an unruly child. He walked to the stand with a confident stride. "Mr. Caro," I said, standing at the podium. "You heard Mr. Reed's testimony. Did you induce him to notarize a codicil for Ruth Butler without her presence?" "Absolutely not," Caro said, his voice rich and baritone. "Mr. Reed is clearly confused, or perhaps trying to cover up his own negligence. I have never suborned fraud in 40 years of practice." "Then let us talk about the codicil," I said. "Did Ruth Butler execute a codicil in the weeks before her death?" Caro sighed, offering a pitying smile to the gallery. Ruth was a dear friend, but toward the end, she was vacillating. She had many ideas. She would write things down, then tear them up. She was struggling with dementia. "Objection," I said. "Lacks foundation. You are not a medical expert." "Sustained," Hargrove said. "Stick to the legal facts, Mr. Caro." "The fact is," Caro continued, "she drafted many things, but she never finalized them. She realized, rightly, that her estate had been decimated by market conditions. She wanted to leave something to her grandchildren, of course, but she came to her senses." "Came to her senses?" I asked. "She realized that leaving money to certain family members would be enabling," Caro said, looking directly at me. His eyes were cold. "She loved you, Madeline, but she worried about your stability. She felt that you were too attached to lost causes, too idealistic. She told me, 'Gregory, if I give her money, she will just throw it away on people who cannot be saved.'" I felt the sting of his words. It was a lie, but it was a lie tailored to hurt. It mirrored everything my father had said to me for years. "So there is no codicil?" I asked. "There is no valid codicil," Caro said firmly. I walked back to my table. I picked up a piece of paper. "Mr. Caro, I would like to introduce Exhibit D. This is an email sent from your work account to the Vice President of Harbor Point, dated November 12, 2022, the day my grandmother died." Caro's confidence flickered. He squinted. "I read from the email," I said. "Subject: Butler Estate. The old girl finally passed. I am scrubbing the file. We need to rescue Ruth's money from sentimental clauses before the granddaughter gets her hands on it. The trust idea is dead. I will bury it with the rest of the paperwork." The courtroom gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. "Where did you get that?" Caro snapped, his facade cracking. "That is privileged communication. That is hacked material." "It was provided by a whistleblower," I said. "And the crime-fraud exception applies to attorney-client privilege. Mr. Caro, you cannot claim privilege over a conspiracy to commit theft." I looked up at Judge Hargrove. "Your Honor, this email suggests that a trust instrument existed and that Mr. Caro intended to bury it. I believe the sealed document filed in the probate docket, entry 402. Is that instrument?" Mr. Caro told the clerk it was medical history to get it sealed, but I believe it is the codicil he tried to hide. Judge Hargrove stared at Caro. Her expression was terrifying. It was the look of a surgeon discovering a tumor. "Mr. Caro," Hargrove said, her voice dangerously quiet, "did you file a sealed document in the Butler estate?" "Your Honor, it was privileged notes," Caro stammered, sweat appearing on his forehead. "It was irrelevant to the distribution." "I will be the judge of what is irrelevant," Hargrove said. She slammed her gavel. "We are in recess. Clerk, go to the archives. Pull file P22409. Bring me the sealed envelope labeled Entry 402. Immediately." "Your Honor!" Victoria Lane stood up. "This is highly irregular." Sit down, Ms. Lane, Hargrove barked, or I will hold you in contempt. No one leaves this courtroom. The recess lasted 20 minutes. They were the longest 20 minutes of my life. The room was deadly silent. My family did not move. My father was staring at the floor, his face ashen. Jenna was looking at me, her eyes wide, stripped of their usual arrogance. Caro was whispering furiously to Victoria Lane, his face red. I stood at my table, clutching the edge of the wood. I felt Alice Munro's hand reach out and touch my shoulder from the bench behind me. "Stand tall," she whispered. The side door opened. The clerk returned. She was holding a large manila envelope with red tape across the seal. She handed it to Judge Hargrove. Hargrove put on her glasses. She took a letter opener and sliced the red tape. The sound was sharp, like a fabric tearing. She reached in and pulled out a document. It was handwritten on blue stationery. I recognized it instantly. It was Grandma Ruth's stationery. Hargrove read it in silence. Her face remained impassive, but her eyes moved slowly, absorbing every word. Then, she looked up. She looked at Caro, and the disgust in her eyes was palpable. Then she looked at me. Her expression softened. "This," Hargrove said, holding up the blue paper, "is a holographic codicil to the last will and testament of Ruth Butler. It is dated November 10th, 2022. It appears to be validly executed." She paused. "I will read the relevant portion into the record." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the HVAC system. "I, Ruth Butler, being of sound mind, do hereby amend my will. I have watched with a heavy heart as the world, and my own family, have been seduced by the idea that worth is measured in gold. My son and my eldest grandchildren have chosen paths of accumulation. That is their right, but I wish to honor a different path." Hargrove's voice wavered slightly, then strengthened. "I hereby establish the Service of Justice Trust. All remaining liquid assets in my accounts, including the bond certificates currently held by Caro and Associates, are to be placed into this trust. The trust shall be payable, in its entirety, to any grandchild of mine who, upon reaching the age of 30, has dedicated at least 10 consecutive years to the practice of public interest law, legal aid, or public defense, serving clients below the federal poverty line." Hargrove lowered the paper. She looked at the gallery. "If no grandchild meets this criteria within 5 years of my death, the funds shall be donated to the Halcyon Springs Legal Aid Society. If a grandchild does meet this criteria, the funds are theirs, to ensure that those who fight for the poor do not have to be poor themselves." Tears blurred my vision. I put a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. She had known. She had seen me. All those years when I thought I was invisible. She was watching. Hargrove turned to the court file. "I have reviewed the bar records," Hargrove said. "Jenna Butler, marketing executive, no legal license. Nathan Butler, technology sector, no legal license. Madeline Butler." She looked at me. "Admitted to the bar 10 years and 3 months ago. Employment history, Halcyon Springs Legal Aid Society. Continuous employment since admission. Your Honor." Victoria Lane stood up, her voice sharp and desperate. "We object to the authentication of this document, and furthermore, even if the trust is valid, Ms. Butler is not a suitable beneficiary. We would point out that Ms. Butler has a record of professional negligence. She was publicly reprimanded 5 years ago for failing to meet statutory filing deadlines. A Service of Justice Trust should not go to an attorney who has failed in her duty to the court." It was a low blow, a vicious, final attempt to discredit me. My father looked up. He looked at me, waiting to see if I would crumble, waiting for the hysterical Madeline to appear. I took a deep breath. I felt the shame of that mistake, the old familiar burn. But this time, it didn't burn me down. It fueled me. I stood up. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Ms. Lane is correct." The courtroom murmured. Lane looked surprised. 5 years ago, I missed a deadline, I said. I failed a client. His name was Marcus, and he lost his chance for justice because I was disorganized and overwhelmed. It was the worst day of my life. I looked at Judge Hargrove. But that failure taught me what this job actually means. It taught me that my competence is the only shield my clients have. Since that day, I have never missed a deadline. I have triple-checked every filing. I have stayed late every night. I carry that reprimand not as a badge of shame, but as a reminder of the weight I carry. My grandmother's trust asks for 10 years of service. It does not ask for 10 years of perfection. It asks for someone who stayed in the fight, and I have stayed. I paused. I am not the attorney I was 5 years ago. I am the attorney who caught the fraud that Mr. Caro and Harbor Point missed or manufactured. I am the attorney who read the fine print. I sat down. Judge Hargrove looked at me for a long moment. There was no sternness in her face now. There was only respect. Well said. Ms. Butler, Hargrove said softly. She turned to Caro and Lane. The objection is overruled. The reprimand is noted, and in this court's view, the plaintiff's conduct in this case demonstrates the highest level of professional competence and ethical fortitude. She gathered her papers. The court finds that the sealed document is the valid, final intent of Ruth Butler. The Service of Justice Trust is active. She looked at my family. And frankly, Hargrove added, her voice sharpening as she addressed my father and siblings directly. It seems Ruth Butler knew exactly who her grandchildren were. She did not define success by your tax brackets. She defined it by character, and it appears she was the only one in your family who recognized the value of the woman sitting at the plaintiff's table. My mother burst into tears, her face buried in her hands. My father slumped in his seat. His face flushed a deep, painful red. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the arrogance vanish, replaced by a crushing, undeniable shame. Jenna and Nathan stared straight ahead, frozen. The narrative of their superiority, the story they had told themselves to justify their selfishness, had just been dismantled by a judge's gavel. We will take a 1-hour recess, Hargrove announced. When we return, I will issue my ruling regarding the Harbor Point fraud allegations and Mr. Caro's licensure. But let me be clear. I have seen enough to know that justice is coming. She slammed the gavel. Court is in recess. The room erupted into noise. Reporters were running out the door. Alice Monroe was hugging Mr. Henderson. I stood still, letting the waves of relief wash over me. I looked at the blue piece of paper still sitting on the judge's bench, to arm Madeline. She had done it. She had given me the weapon I needed. But more than that, she had given me the truth. I wasn't the failure. I was the one she had bet on. And I had won. The recess ended not with a bang, but with the heavy, deliberate silence of a storm about to break. When the bailiff opened the doors, the air in Department 402 felt pressurized, as if the oxygen had been replaced by pure anticipation. I stood at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped in front of me to hide a tremor I could not quite suppress. To my right, the Harbor Point team looked significantly less regal than they had an hour ago. Victoria Lane was furiously whispering to a junior associate, while Gregory Caro stared straight ahead, his jaw set in a rigid line of defiance that looked increasingly brittle. To my left, my family sat like statues. My mother was clutching a handkerchief. My father, usually a man of restless energy, was completely still, his eyes fixed on the empty bench. They were waiting for the verdict, but I knew they were also waiting to see if their world, the world where money equaled virtue and Caro was infallible, was about to shatter. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Eleanor Hargrove swept into the room. She did not look at the lawyers. She did not look at the gallery. She took her seat, adjusted her robe, and opened the file before her with a snap that echoed like a gunshot. Be seated, she commanded. She took a sip of water, her eyes scanning the courtroom before landing on Victoria Lane. The court has reviewed the evidence presented, Hargrove began, her voice crisp and ringing with authority. "This includes the testimony of Mr. Tyler Reed, the internal communications provided by the plaintiff, and the loan documents concerning Mrs. Alice Monroe." She leaned forward. "The law of contracts is built on a foundation of mutual assent," Hargrove said. "It assumes that two parties, acting in good faith, agree to terms. What I have seen in this courtroom today is not mutual assent, it is predation." She picked up the Harbor Point loan agreement. Harbor Point Capital, through its agents and its counsel, engaged in a systemic practice of robotic notarization, effectively removing the only safeguard a homeowner has against fraud. The testimony of Mr. Reed confirms that documents were notarized in bulk, without the signatories present, often days after the fact. This renders the notarizations void ab initio. Hargrove dropped the document back onto the desk. Furthermore, the internal memos describing a strategy to push negative amortization products on elderly clients with the specific intent of seizing equity constitute evidence of fraudulent inducement. Therefore, the arbitration clauses contained within these contracts are unconscionable and unenforceable. The court hereby strikes them. A gasp went through the room. Victoria Lane stood up. "Your Honor, we must object to—" "Sit down, counsel," Hargrove said, her voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "I am not finished." Lane sat, her face pale. "Regarding the matter of Monroe versus Harbor Point," Hargrove continued, "the court finds that the loan instrument is defective and the product of fraud. I am exercising my equitable powers to rescind the loan. The principal is deemed satisfied by the payments already made. Mrs. Monroe's title is cleared. Effective immediately. Harbor Point will issue a reconveyance within 48 hours. I heard Alice Monroe sob behind me. It was a raw, wet sound of relief. As for counsel, Hargrove turned her gaze to the defense table, looking directly at Gregory Caro. The court is referring this entire record, including the transcripts of Mr. Reed's testimony and the internal emails involving Mr. Caro to the State Attorney General for investigation into criminal fraud and racketeering. I am also referring Mr. Caro and Mrs. Lane to the State Bar Disciplinary Board for immediate review of their licensure. Caro did not move. He seemed to have turned to stone. The pillar of the legal community, the man my father revered, had just been dismantled in under 5 minutes. Now, Hargrove said, shifting her papers, we turn to the estate of Ruth Butler. She picked up the blue handwritten letter. The atmosphere in the room shifted from legal tension to emotional gravity. Mr. Caro argued that Ruth Butler was a confused woman who needed to be saved from her own sentimentality. Hargrove said, the evidence suggests otherwise. The evidence suggests a woman of keen intellect who knew exactly what she valued and who she trusted. She looked at Caro. You, sir, owed a fiduciary duty to your client. Instead, you substituted your judgment for hers. You decided that her desire to support public service was wasteful because it did not align with your own worldview of accumulation. You suppressed a valid testamentary instrument. You lied to the court clerk to seal it. That is not just a breach of ethics. It is a betrayal of the dead. Hargrove turned to me. The court declares the holographic codicil dated November 10th, 2022 to be valid. The Service of Justice Trust is hereby established. Mr. Caro is removed as executor immediately. The court orders a full forensic accounting of all assets held by Caro and Associates on behalf of Ruth Butler, to be transferred to the trust within 7 days. She paused, letting the weight of the order settle. And, she added, based on the clear criteria set forth by Ruth Butler, requiring 10 years of continuous service in public interest law, the court finds that Madeline Butler is the sole qualifying beneficiary. The trust and its assets belong to her. I closed my eyes. It wasn't the money. I didn't even know how much money it was. It was the vindication. It was the fact that Grandma Ruth had built a lifeboat for me, and Judge Hargrove had just pulled it to the surface. One final matter, Hargrove said. She took off her reading glasses and folded them on the desk. She looked past me, past Caro, directly into the front row of the gallery. "I speak now to the family of the deceased," she said. Her voice was not angry, but it was incredibly firm. "I have presided over probate cases for 20 years. I have seen families torn apart by greed, but rarely have I seen a family so thoroughly misunderstand the legacy of their own matriarch." My father straightened up, looking terrified. "You sat in this courtroom," Hargrove said, addressing my father directly, "and you listened to testimony that painted your daughter as a failure. You viewed her career in legal aid as a disappointment, a consolation prize for not being smart enough or cutthroat enough for corporate law." My father's face flushed a deep, painful crimson. He looked down at his lap. "Let me tell you what this court sees." Hargrove continued. "I see an attorney who spotted a complex fraud that a dozen high-priced corporate lawyers missed. I see a woman who stood up for a stranger's home when no one else would. I see a granddaughter who embodies the very values Ruth Butler spent her life fighting for." Hargrove leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Jenna and Nathan. "This court does not measure worth by the size of a bonus check or the prestige of a firm's address. We measure it by integrity, by service, by the courage to stand in the well of this court and speak for the voiceless. Ruth Butler knew that. She did not leave this trust to Madeline because she pitied her. She left it to Madeline because she was the only one she was proud of." The words hung in the air, absolute and devastating. I heard a sound from the front row. It was my mother. She had buried her face in her hands and was weeping openly, her shoulders shaking. It wasn't a polite cry. It was the sound of a dam breaking, the realization that she had spent years apologizing for the child she should have been championing. My father looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and wide. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. He slumped back in the bench. A man whose entire measuring stick for the world had just been snapped in half. Jenna and Nathan just stared straight ahead, their expressions blank with shock. The narrative they had built their lives around, that they were the winners and I was the loser, had been dissolved by the highest authority in the room. "The hearing is adjourned," Hargrove said. She banged the gavel. The room erupted into movement, but I stood still. Alice Munro grabbed my hand, squeezing it hard. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, baby." "Ms. Butler," the bailiff said, stepping up to my table. "The judge requests you remain. She would like to see you in chambers." I nodded, numb. I packed my bag slowly. I watched Caro and Lane practically sprint out of the side exit, fleeing the reporters. I watched my family stand up. My mother looked at me, her face wet with tears. "Madeline," she choked out. "Not now." "Mom," I said gently. "I have to go." I couldn't handle their apologies or their excuses yet. I walked past them, through the wooden gate, and followed the bailiff into the corridor behind the bench. Judge Hargrove's chambers smelled of old leather and vanilla. It was a stark contrast to the sterile courtroom, walls lined with books stretched to the ceiling. Hargrove was sitting at her desk. Having already removed her robe, she looked smaller without it, but no less formidable. "Sit down, Madeline," she said, gesturing to a comfortable leather chair. I sat. "Thank you, Your Honor, for everything." "Do not thank me for doing my job," she said, waving a hand. "I simply applied the law. You did the heavy lifting. That was an impressive piece of litigation out there. You dismantled Caro with surgical precision." "I had good evidence," I said. "You had good instincts," she corrected, "and you had the guts to use them." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You know, I have been watching you for a long time." I blinked. "You have?" "Halcyon Springs is a small legal community," Hargrove said. "I see the filings. I see who does the work. For the last 5 years, every time a pro bono housing defense came across my desk that was actually coherent, it had your name on it. I watched you handle the chaotic docket in Department 6, I watched you treat terrified people with dignity. I was just doing my job, I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. Exactly, Hargrove smiled. Most lawyers want to be stars. You just wanted to be effective. That is a rare quality. She opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The chief judge and I were having lunch last week, she said casually. We were discussing the vacancy for the new magistrate position. It handles the landlord-tenant calendar, small claims, and emergency protective orders. It is unglamorous, high volume, and absolutely vital to the health of this city. She slid the paper across the desk. It was a formal job description for a magistrate judge. I told him I had a name, Hargrove said. I told him I wanted to see how you handled this hearing today before I made the formal recommendation. I told him that if you stood your ground against Gregory Caro and your own family, you were ready. My heart stopped. Me? A magistrate? Why not you? Because, I stammered, the old voice in my head rearing up, because I am just a legal aid attorney. I have a disciplinary record. I am not. Look at me. I am a mess. Hargrove laughed. A warm, rich sound. Madeline, look at me. I was a public defender for 15 years. I was held in contempt twice for refusing to let a judge steamroll my client. The bench does not need more people who have spent their lives in ivory towers. It needs people who know what it feels like to be on the other side of the courtroom. But I made a mistake, I whispered. The missed deadline. It still haunts me. Good, Hargrove said sharply. It should haunt you. The day you stop worrying about making a mistake is the day you should quit. Arrogance causes injustice. Madeline, humility prevents it. You have humility. Caro had arrogance. Who won today? I looked at the paper. Magistrate judge. I do not know if I can do it, I confessed. Presiding over a courtroom? Making the decisions? Hargrove stood up. She walked over to a closet in the corner and pulled out a spare black robe. There is only one way to find out, she said. She walked back to the desk and placed another document next to the job description. It was a court order. Order appointing judge pro tempore. Under state law, Hargrove said, I can appoint a temporary judge for specific matters with the consent of the parties. My afternoon calendar is light, just a few uncontested settlement approvals and one landlord-tenant dispute. She tapped the paper. I drafted this morning, she admitted. I had a feeling. You want me to now? I asked, my voice squeaking. Right now, Hargrove said. The parties are waiting. I have already cleared it with them. They just want a judge who will listen. Sign the order. Madeline. I looked at her. Her eyes were fierce and kind, demanding and supportive. She was offering me a terrifying cliff, but she was promising I would fly. I thought of my father's face when he told me I didn't understand business. I thought of Nathan laughing at my charity work, and then I thought of Grandma Ruth, writing that letter on her blue stationery, betting everything she had on me. I picked up the pen. My hand shook, but I forced the tip to the paper. Madeline Butler. I signed it. Hargrove smiled. She handed me the robe. Put it on. It might be a little long, but we can hem it later. I stood up and slipped my arms into the heavy black fabric. It settled onto my shoulders with a weight that felt grounding. Not crushing. It smelled of cedar. How does it feel? Hargrove asked. I took a breath. Heavy. It is supposed to be, she said. Come on. Your court awaits. We walked back into the courtroom. The gallery had thinned out, but my family was still there. They hadn't moved. They sat in the front row, looking like survivors of a shipwreck waiting for rescue. When the side door opened, the bailiff stood up. All rise. Hargrove walked in, but she didn't go to the bench. She stopped at the counsel table. Please be seated, Hargrove said. She turned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, for the remainder of the afternoon calendar, pursuant to a signed order of appointment and the consent of the parties, the Honorable Madeline Butler, Judge pro tempore, will be presiding. A shockwave went through the front row. My father's jaw literally dropped. Jenna grabbed Nathan's arm. Hargrove turned to me, offering a small, proud smile that was just for us. "Ms. Butler," she said, gesturing to the elevated chair. "Would you please come up here and take the bench for me?" I walked. I walked past the council table where I had spent 10 years begging for scraps of justice. I walked past the front row. I saw my father staring at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. I saw my mother, her hands pressed to her chest. A fresh wave of tears starting. But these looked different. These looked like pride. I walked up the 3 steps to the bench. The elevation changed the perspective of the entire room. I could see everything. I could see the nervous tenant in the back. I could see the tired landlord. I could see the truth. I sat down in the high-backed leather chair. It was immense. I looked down at the docket sheet in front of me. "Call the first case," I said. My voice sounded different, deeper, resonant, amplified by the microphone and the authority of the robe. "Case number 2499, the bailiff called. "Smith versus Johnson." A young woman and an older man stepped forward. They looked nervous. "Good afternoon," I said. "I have reviewed the file. It appears you have reached a stipulated agreement regarding the rent arrears. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," the landlord said. "Yes, Your Honor," the tenant whispered. I looked at the tenant. She was shaking. I recognized the look. It was the look of someone who expected the system to hurt her. "Ms. Johnson," I said gently, "I want to make sure you understand the terms. This agreement says you will pay an extra $50 a month for 10 months. If you miss a payment, the eviction proceeds immediately. Do you have the budget for that extra $50? She looked up at me, surprised by the question. I think so. I just got a second shift." "Thinking so is dangerous in a court order," I said kindly. "Let us look at the dates. If we move the due date to the 5th of the month instead of the 1st, does that help with your paycheck cycle?" "Oh," she exhaled. "Oh, yes, that would help a lot." I looked at the landlord. "Mr. Smith, is the 5th acceptable to you, provided the total amount remains the same?" "I suppose so," he said, "as long as I get paid." "Excellent," I said. I picked up a pen. "I am amending the stipulation to reflect a due date of the 5th. This gives Ms. Johnson a chance to succeed, which means you get your money. That is a fair outcome." I signed the order. "Judgment entered," I said. "Good luck to you both." I watched them leave. They both looked relieved. It was a small thing, a simple date change, but it was the difference between an eviction and a home. I looked out at the gallery one last time. My father met my gaze. He nodded. It was a small, jerky movement, but it was an acknowledgement. He finally saw me. He didn't see the daughter who failed to make a fortune. He saw the judge. That night, my apartment was quiet. It was a modest 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor, with a view of the alley. But tonight it felt like a palace. I sat at my small kitchen table. The surface was scratched laminate, but I had arranged my treasures on it with care. In the center was the blue handwritten letter from Grandma Ruth. To Arm Madeline. To the left was the copy of the order appointing Judge pro tempore, signed by Eleanor Hargrove. And to the right were the trust documents. I hadn't looked at the numbers yet. I didn't need to. I knew that for the first time in my life, I could buy a car that didn't rattle. I could pay off my student loans. I could breathe. My phone buzzed. I picked it up. It was a text from an unknown number. "The bench needs people like you. The application is on your desk. E.H." I stared at the screen. The tears finally coming, hot and cleansing. For 33 years, I had let my family define the word success. I had let them tell me I was small because I didn't want what they wanted. I had let them convince me that my compassion was a weakness and my career was a failure. But they were wrong. Grandma Ruth knew it. Judge Hargrove knew it. And finally, sitting in my quiet kitchen with the weight of the robe still ghosting on my shoulders, I knew it. I wasn't a failure. I was a guardian, and guardians belong on the wall, or in my case, on the bench. I picked up my pen and pulled the magistrate application toward me. Name: Madeline Butler. Current occupation: attorney at law. I smiled, wiped my eyes, and began to write. The story of the disappointment was over. The story of the judge had just begun. Thank you so much for listening to Family Said I Failed. Then the judge asked me to take the bench herself. I hope Madeline's journey from the black sheep of the family to the woman in the black robe resonated with you. It is a reminder that success isn't always about the biggest paycheck. Sometimes it is about having the courage to stand up for what is right. Even when you are standing alone, I would love to hear your thoughts on the story. Did you suspect Gregory Caro all along? How did you feel about the family's reaction in the courtroom? And please, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, redemption, and turning the tables. Share your thoughts in English in the comments below.